The signal came at 3:47 in the morning. No one was ready for it. No one is ever ready for the thing that changes everything. Dr. Priya Nair was the one who caught it. She was sitting in the deep dish radio telescope control room in New Mexico, drinking cold coffee and watching data scroll across 3 monitors. She had been doing this for 11 years. Nothing ever happened. Stars made noise. Pulsars ticked like broken clocks. The universe hummed to itself and paid no attention to the small woman in the small room, watching the small green lines move. Then the green lines did something they had never done before. They spiked. Hard. All of them. At once. Priya set down her coffee mug. She looked at the monitors. She looked away. She looked back. The spike was still there. It was not random noise. Random noise looked like static, like the universe sneezing. This was structured. This was layered. This had patterns inside patterns, like a letter written inside another letter, sealed inside a third envelope that had no return address, but somehow still felt personal. She hit record. She hit every record button she could find. Then she picked up her phone and called her supervisor, Dr. Marcus Webb, who answered on the 7th ring, sounding like a man who had been very deeply asleep. "Webb," she said, "you need to come in. Priya, it is 4 in the morning. I know what time it is." There was a pause. Something in her voice reached through the phone and shook him awake better than any alarm could have. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He was there in 12. By 6 in the morning, there were 9 people in the room. By 8, there were 40. By noon, the building had been locked down, the parking lot filled with black cars, and someone had quietly switched off the public-facing feed that usually let amateur astronomers watch the telescope's data in real time. The signal kept coming. It was not a burst. It was not a one-time spike. It was continuous, steady, and growing slightly stronger every hour, as if whatever was sending it was moving closer, or as if it wanted to be sure it was being heard. The translation took 6 days. 6 days of the best minds in 3 countries, staring at screens, arguing in hallways, sleeping on cots in conference rooms, surviving on vending machine food, and the kind of desperate focus that only comes when a person understands that what they are looking at will never let them go back to ordinary life. What they decoded was not a greeting. It was not a mathematical proof. It was not a map of stars. It was not the kind of first contact that anyone had written books about or made movies about or spent careers dreaming of. It was a report, a military report, written in a language that was not human, but structured enough, logical enough, that the translators could follow its bones even when the flesh of it confused them. It had headers. It had numbered sections. It had the cold, functional tone of a document written by someone who dealt in facts and had no interest in feelings. The title of the report, as best they could render it in English, was something like Assessment and Classification of Target System, Sol 3, Status, Approved for Harvest. The room went very quiet when that translation came through. Someone coughed. Someone else said harvest under their breath, the way a person repeats a word they have just heard in a language they thought they knew but suddenly are not sure about. Dr. Webb read the translation 3 times. Then he sat down in a chair and did not say anything for a long while. Priya stood at the window and looked at the desert outside. It was a clear day. The sky was very blue. A hawk was circling something far out in the scrub. She thought, we never looked up and worried about what was looking back. The report laid it out with the kind of precision that made it worse. Earth, which the report called Sol 3, because it was the 3rd object in orbit around its star, because whoever wrote this had no interest in what the inhabitants called it, had been under observation for what the translators calculated to be approximately 200 years. 200 years of quiet watching. 200 years of sampling the atmosphere from a distance, measuring the electromagnetic output, cataloging the species, mapping the resources. The resources, that word appeared 47 times in the document. The translators counted. Water, biomass, mineral deposits, atmospheric composition, gravitational conditions. The report assessed all of it with the language of inventory. Earth was not a planet with people on it. Earth was a storage facility with an infestation problem that would need to be managed before extraction could begin. The infestation was humanity. The report was not cruel about this. That was almost the worst part. It was not written by something that hated humans. It was written by something that had not thought about humans enough to hate them. The section on human civilization was 6 paragraphs long. 6 paragraphs, after 200 years of observation. It noted that the species was technically advanced enough to have developed basic space travel and nuclear weapons, which placed it in a risk category that required accelerated timeline for the operation. Not because humans were dangerous, because humans might damage the resources before extraction. Colonel Dana Reyes got the briefing on day 7. She sat in a room with no windows in a building in Virginia and listened to a man in a suit read the translated document aloud, and she kept her face still the entire time because she had spent 23 years learning to keep her face still. When he finished, she said, "What's the timeline?" The man in the suit said they were still working on that. The signal's trajectory and increasing strength suggested the source was moving toward the solar system. Their best models put the estimated arrival at somewhere between 4 and 7 years. "Best case 4, he said. "Worst case 7. Reyes said, "What assets do we have in space right now?" The man said, "Nothing that would matter." Reyes looked at the table. It was a nice table. She thought about how long it had taken humans to learn to make nice tables. She thought about all the things people had built and planted and written and said to each other across the whole long mess of history. All the things they had been certain were permanent. All the things that felt like they would last forever because they always had before. "All right," she said, "then we need to build things that matter." The decision to tell the public took 3 weeks of argument. Some people said never tell them. People will panic. There will be riots. Governments will fall. Religion will fracture. The whole fragile structure of civilization will come apart at the seams the moment you say the words alien invasion in a press conference. Other people said, "Tell them now." Every day of preparation wasted on secrecy is a day humanity needs. Tell them. Trust them. They have handled hard things before. The argument went on. Meanwhile, in laboratories in 6 countries, in shipyards that had been quietly repurposed, in universities where certain research grants were suddenly approved overnight, the preparation had already begun. Because some decisions do not wait for permission. Dr. Priya Nair was not invited to those meetings. She was a radio astronomer. She found the thing. That was her part. She went back to New Mexico. She sat in the control room. She watched the signal on her monitors, steady and patient and growing, 1 degree stronger every 3 days. She started a journal, not because anyone asked her to, not because she thought anyone would read it. She started it because she needed somewhere to put the feeling of knowing something that the rest of the world did not yet know. "Day 1 of knowing," she wrote. "The hawks are still hunting. The coffee is still cold. The universe is the same size it was yesterday. But I am not. We thought we were alone, and we were wrong. We thought if something was out there, it would be curious about us. We were wrong about that too. It is coming. It does not know our names. It does not want to. I keep thinking, 200 years. It watched us for 200 years and decided we were in the way. I wonder what it saw. I wonder what we looked like from that far away. I wonder if any of what we are, any of the music, the arguments, the love, the wars, the whole overwhelming complicated everything of us, registered at all. I think it did not. I think we were background noise to something that was only interested in what was underneath us. That makes me angry in a way I do not have words for yet. Good. I think anger is the correct response. The public announcement came on a Tuesday in March. The President of the United States spoke from the Oval Office. The Secretary General of the United Nations spoke from New York. The leaders of 14 nations released simultaneous statements in 40 languages. The words were careful. The tone was steady. The information was delivered the way you deliver a diagnosis. Clearly, without cruelty, with the understanding that clarity is the only kindness available. Earth had received a signal. The signal had been translated. The translation indicated that an alien force had designated Earth as a target for resource extraction. An unknown number of ships were believed to be in transit. Estimated arrival window was 4 to 7 years. World governments had already begun coordinated response efforts. There was no cause for panic. There was no cause for panic. The news anchors repeated that part. In Times Square, a man sat down on the sidewalk in the middle of the crowd and did not move for a long time. People walked around him. In a village in Nigeria, an old woman listened to her grandson read the news aloud from his phone, and then she said, in Yoruba, something that roughly translated to, "So the sky is not just sky after all." Then she went inside to start the evening meal, because the meal still needed to be made. In Tokyo, 2 physicists who had been arguing for years about a theory of propulsion that their colleagues called impossible, looked at each other across a cluttered desk and did not say a word. Then one of them pulled out a pen and they started working. In Moscow, in Beijing, in Mumbai, in Sao Paulo, in Nairobi, in every city and town where the signal reached, which was everywhere. People stopped what they were doing. Some of them were afraid, some of them cried, some of them prayed, and some of them, more than anyone expected, more than the people who argued about whether to tell the public had counted on, did something else entirely. They got up. They went to work. Priya watched the announcement from the control room. She had a small television in the corner that she never turned on. She turned it on. She watched the president speak. She watched the words scroll across the bottom of the screen in different languages. She watched the crowd shots, the faces, the city squares around the world filling with people standing very still and very close together. Then she turned the television off and looked at her monitors. The signal was still there. Of course it was. It did not care about press conferences. She pulled up the raw data from the first night. The spike. The moment. She looked at it for a long time. 200 years of being watched. 4 to 7 years until something arrived that thought of them as a problem to be cleared away. She thought about the hawk she had seen from the window on the morning of the translation. The way it circled. Patient. Certain. Already knowing what it was going to do. She thought, we are not the hawk in this story. Then she thought, not yet. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Webb. I want to be part of the response team, she said, before he could say hello. Webb was quiet for a moment. Priya, you're a radio astronomer. I know what I am, she said. I also know how they talk. I found the signal. I learned their structure. I spent 6 days inside their logic figuring out how they think. That's not the same as, they filed a report on us, she said. Marcus, they wrote a report. With sections and subsections and a conclusions paragraph. Whatever they are, they think in a particular way. And I spent 6 days learning it. Silence. I want to be part of what comes next, she said. Webb said, I'll make some calls. She hung up. She looked at the signal on her screen. Steady, growing, patient. She thought, you do not know what you woke up. She thought, 4 years is a long time. She thought, let us show you what we do with 4 years. The first year was chaos, organized chaos, but chaos all the same. Humanity had never tried to do one thing before. It had always been the defining problem. Too many countries, too many languages, too many old arguments, too many borders drawn in blood that no one was willing to simply unsee. The history of the world was the history of people who could not agree on anything long enough to do the impossible thing together. But the signal changed the math, because the signal did not care about any of those borders. Whatever was coming was not going to check which side of a line on a map you were standing on before it decided whether you were a resource or an inconvenience. The extraction, as the report called it, was going to be planetary. All of it. Every inch. Every person. That fact, cold, impersonal, logistical, turned out to be a better argument for cooperation than 50 years of diplomacy had managed to be. The United Earth Defense Initiative was formally signed by 142 nations in the first 6 months. Not because everyone trusted each other. They did not. The distrust was still there, old and deep and real. But distrust was a luxury that required a future to spend it in. And right now, that future was negotiable in a way it had never been before. So they signed. And then, for the first time in recorded history, they meant it. Colonel Dana Reyes was given command of the UAD Ground Operations Division, which was a title that sounded more organized than it was. What she actually had was a mandate, a budget that nations were fighting to contribute to, and a problem she had never been trained for. She had spent her career preparing for human wars, wars with a logic she understood, territory, ideology, resources, power. Wars that had rules, even when they were broken. Wars that were fought between people who at least understood each other, in the way that two people who speak different languages can still read each other's faces. This was not that. She sat in her new office in Geneva with a stack of reports and a whiteboard, and said to her aide, a young lieutenant named Torres, walk me through what we know about how they fight. Torres said, we don't know how they fight, ma'am. What do we know? We know how they think. Based on the document, they're methodical. They assess before they move. They categorize risk. They have timelines and approval processes. Reyes looked at the whiteboard. Bureaucrats. In a sense. Yes, ma'am. Bureaucrats with a fleet, she said. That's the working assumption. She picked up a marker. She wrote on the whiteboard. They approved a plan. They are executing the plan. They do not expect the plan to change. She looked at it. Our entire job, she said, is to be the thing that breaks their plan. Torres nodded. How many surprises can we build in 4 years? She asked. Torres said, We're about to find out. The shipyards ran around the clock. There had been shipyards before, of course. Dry docks and orbital construction facilities and space stations assembled piece by piece over decades. But that was before. Before meant patient timelines and budget reviews, and the kind of engineering that built things to last centuries. This was not before anymore. The word that kept appearing in the memos, in the briefings, in the late-night arguments in conference rooms across 3 continents, was enough. Not perfect, not beautiful, not built to outlast the people who built it. Enough. Enough to fight. Enough to matter. Enough to make whatever was coming pay a price it had not calculated for. The Kepler yards above the Pacific were the first to come online at full wartime capacity, which was a phrase that felt strange to say, because there had never been a wartime capacity for space before. But it was the accurate phrase, so people used it. The first ships off the line were not impressive. They were ugly, honestly. All function and no form. Built by engineers who had been given permission to stop caring about how things looked as long as they worked. They had thick hulls and oversized drive systems and weapon pylons that the designers admitted were partly guesswork, because no one actually knew what kind of weapons would matter against an alien fleet. That was the problem at the center of everything. The honest, terrifying problem that kept the best minds awake at 3 in the morning. They did not know what they were up against. The report gave them almost nothing useful about the enemy's capabilities. It was written as an assessment of Earth, not a briefing on the writers. It was like trying to understand a hunter by only reading the hunter's notes on the prey. So they guessed. They theorized. They built the best things they could think of and tested them and ripped them apart and rebuilt them. And every iteration got a little better, and they tried not to think too hard about what good enough looked like when the benchmark was a civilization that had been doing this, traveling between stars, assessing planets, running extractions, for what might have been thousands of years. Dr. Yuki Tanaka thought about it all the time. Yuki was one of the physicists from Tokyo, the two who had been arguing about the propulsion theory when the announcement came. Her colleague, Dr. Sho Imai, had packed a bag within 48 hours and driven to the nearest Uedi Research Center to offer his work directly. Yuki had taken 3 days. She needed those 3 days to think. The theory they had been arguing about, that she had been arguing about, mostly against, because it violated things she had been taught were violations, was called asymmetric field propulsion. The idea was that if you could generate a particular kind of field asymmetry at the subatomic level, you could effectively cheat the energy cost of acceleration. Not free energy. Nothing was free. But close enough to free that it changed what was possible. The problem was that the math required certain constants to be slightly wrong. Not wrong, not catastrophically wrong, just wrong in a specific way that existing theory said they could not be. The thing was, and this was the thing Yuki had spent 3 days sitting with, nobody had ever actually measured those constants in the conditions the theory required. They had been inferred, modeled, assumed, with the confidence of people who had built a lot of successful things on those assumptions and therefore trusted them. She arrived at the Uedi Advanced Propulsion Lab on day 4 and said to Imai, I want to run the measurement experiments. Imai looked at her. I thought you said the theory was physically impossible. I said the constants made it impossible, she said. I want to measure the constants. That will take 6 months. Yes, she said. We have 4 years. Let's not waste them, assuming things we haven't checked. The signal got stronger. By the end of the first year, it had increased in intensity by a factor of 12. The trajectory models were refined. The arrival window shrank from 4 to 7 years to a sharper estimate. 4 years and 3 months, plus or minus 6 weeks. Priya published the refined estimate. She was part of the signal intelligence team now. The group tasked with continued analysis of the transmission. Because it had not stopped. It kept coming. Steady, patient, growing. The team had learned a great deal about the signal's structure by now. It was not just the original report, repeated on a loop. The transmission had multiple layers, like sediment in rock, and as they dug deeper, they found things the first week of frantic translation had missed. Most of it was communication between the fleet and some distant command, orders, status updates, logistics. Dry and functional and deeply useful because every piece of it was a piece of how this civilization thought, how it organized itself, what it valued, what it treated as risk. 2 things stood out. The first was that the fleet was not one fleet. It was multiple groups, staged in sequence, with different roles. The first wave was assessment and suppression, the largest ships, the most firepower. the job of removing obstacles. The second wave was extraction, which meant the actual collection of resources. The third wave, based on timeline references in the communications, would arrive approximately 14 months after the first. One fleet they had known about. 3 fleets changed the math. The second thing was a reference, repeated several times across different messages, to a category designation applied to Sol 3. The word translated roughly as uncomplicated. It appeared in a context that made clear it was a rating of expected resistance. Sol 3 was rated uncomplicated. Priya read that translation and felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite satisfaction. It was the feeling you get when someone underestimates you so completely that it stops being insulting and starts being useful. She flagged both findings and sent them up the chain. Then she sat for a while in the quiet of the signal room, listening to the static underneath the transmission, and thought about what it meant to be uncomplicated. She had a brother who worked construction, who had, on 3 separate occasions, broken bones on the job and gone back to work the next week because the project did not stop for broken bones. She had a mother who had emigrated from Kerala with $40 and a bag and built a life out of it piece by piece through 30 years of work that did not look like anything from the outside, but was, in the way she had always understood her mother, a kind of relentless quiet war. She thought about the old woman in the video from Nigeria, the one her team had seen on the news the night of the announcement, going inside to make the meal. She thought about the Tokyo physicists, the shipyard workers running triple shifts, the 16-year-old in Germany who had gone viral for posting a video of himself teaching himself orbital mechanics in a week, and then solving an actual navigation problem that a UAD engineer had posted publicly as unsolvable, uncomplicated. "Okay," she said to the empty room. "Sure." In the 14th month, Yuki Tanaka measured the constants. She and Imai ran the experiment 7 times. The results were the same every time. The constants were wrong. Not wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. Wrong in a specific way that an existing theory said they could not be, except apparently they could be. Yuki sat in the lab at 2 in the morning and looked at the results and did not say anything for a long time. Imai sat across from her and also did not say anything. The lab hummed. A coffee maker in the corner made a sound. Finally, Imai said, So, Yuki said, "the theory works." "Theoretically," she said. "The measurement supports it. The engineering is another matter." "The engineering will take 2 years," she said. "Maybe less if we get the right people. We don't have much more than 2 years." "I know." They looked at each other. "We should tell someone," Imai said. "We should tell everyone," Yuki said. She pulled up her email, found the UEDI Advanced Research Priority line, and began to type. She laid it out clearly and without drama. The experiment, the results, the implication, the timeline. The implication was this: if asymmetric field propulsion was real, and apparently it was, then the energy cost of acceleration was something humans could cheat. Ships that had been designed around conventional drive limitations could be redesigned. Speed that had been assumed impossible was not. Range that had seemed like it required decades was within reach. More importantly, and this was the part she wrote carefully, choosing every word, it suggested something about the enemy. A civilization advanced enough to cross between stars had been doing it for a long time, long enough to have optimized, to have settled on approaches that worked and stopped looking for new ones. They might not have checked those constants recently. They might have the same assumption humans had started with. The technology she was describing might be something they had never seen before, not because it was impossible, because they had stopped expecting anything new. She sent the email at 2:34 in the morning. By 6 a.m., she had responses from 11 research teams. By noon, she was on a call with Dana Reyes. Reyes read the summary. She set the paper down. She looked at Yuki through the screen and said, "You're telling me we might have something they don't expect." "That's what I'm saying," Yuki said. "I could be wrong, but you don't think you're wrong." A pause. "No," Yuki said. "I don't think I'm wrong." Reyes said, "How long?" 2 years to first prototype. 1 more to production scale. That's cutting it close. Everything is cutting it close, Yuki said. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Build it." Yuki said, "I already started." The second year was different from the first. In the first year, people were scared. Scared in the way that keeps the body moving, because stopping is more frightening than going forward. There was energy in that fear, real energy, the kind that built the first ships and filled the first volunteer rosters. and kept the shipyard lights burning at 3 in the morning. The second year was harder, because in the second year the fear settled in. It stopped being sharp and emergency-shaped, and became something larger and heavier, like weather. It was just there. Every morning you woke up and the signal was still coming, and the clock was still running, and the thing was still out there, moving toward you at a speed you could not feel but could calculate, and the calculation was never good news. Suicide rates went up. That was in the reports, buried in the statistics, a number that climbed quietly in the second year in every country that tracked it. Mental health services expanded, churches filled, some emptied. Some people decided that a God who allowed this was not a God worth keeping, and walked out of their faith permanently. Others decided the opposite. Philosophy departments at universities reported the highest enrollment numbers in history, not because people suddenly loved philosophy, because people needed somewhere to put the question that had no practical answer. What does this mean? It did not slow the work down. Priya noticed that. The numbers in the shipyards did not drop. The research output did not drop. People grieved and doubted and struggled and still showed up. That surprised her a little, and then it stopped surprising her. She had grown up watching her mother do hard things without stopping. She had always thought that was a specific quality of her mother, a personal stubbornness, a character thing. Now she thought it might be a species thing. Maybe that was arrogance. She was willing to risk it. The question of how to fight the first wave dominated everything. Reyes had made a decision early that turned out to be important. She refused to plan for a single scenario. The temptation was to pick the most likely outcome and optimize for it. That was efficient. It also meant that if you were wrong, you had nothing. Instead, she built what she called the decision tree. 17 branches, representing the 17 most plausible first contact scenarios, based on everything the signal team had decoded about the enemy's fleet structure, their tactics, their assumptions. Each branch had its own response plan, its own resource allocation, its own chain of command. 17 plans. It was massive and complicated, and her logistics people looked at it the first time, and one of them actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was too big to hold in your head, and that laughter was the only pressure valve available. Reyes said, "We practice all 17. They practiced all 17. The simulations ran on rotating 2-week cycles. Different scenarios, different commanders, different variables. The goal was not to find the one right answer. The goal was to make sure no one on her team was ever looking at a situation for the first time. She had learned this in her first combat deployment, 23 years ago. The thing that killed people was not the situation. It was the new. The moment of "I have never seen this before" was the most dangerous moment, because the brain stopped operating and started freezing. She could not eliminate the new. What she could do was build people who froze for half a second, instead of 5. Torres watched the simulations and noticed something. He brought it to Reyes during a break in the 3rd cycle. "The teams are getting faster," he said. "That's the point." "No, ma'am, I mean, they're getting faster than the model predicts they should. The adaptation curve is steeper than the baseline." Reyes looked at the data he handed her. "What do you think is causing it?" she asked. Torres hesitated. "Honestly, I think they know what's at stake. Usually in training exercises there's a kind of theoretical distance. People go through the motions. This time nobody is going through the motions." Reyes looked at the chart. The adaptation curve, running steeper than model. People who knew the consequences were real, learning faster than people who were pretending. She made a note of it. She did not know yet what she was going to do with it, but she made a note. Yuki's first prototype failed. Not catastrophically. It did not explode, which she considered a baseline success worth noting. But it did not produce the field asymmetry at the power level the theory required. The outputs were a third of what they needed. She and Imai stood in the testing chamber and looked at the machine and the data and each other. "We need a different approach to the containment geometry," Imai said. "I know," Yuki said. "The current design assumes—" "I know," she said again. She was quiet for a moment. The testing chamber smelled like ozone and hot metal. The machine hummed the way things hum when they have done something, but not the thing you needed them to do. "I'm not worried about the containment geometry," she said. "Then what are you worried about?" "The scaling problem," she said. "We can fix the containment. I have 3 ideas already. But when we scale from this to a ship drive, the field interactions at that mass are going to be different. We don't have data on that. We'd have to model it." Imai said, "Modeling takes time." "Yes. How much time do we have?" 18 months, she said. to prototype a working ship drive, not just a lab demonstration. Imai was quiet. "It's possible," he said finally. "I know," she said. "It's also possible we get most of the way there, and it's not enough." Most of the way to something impossible is still further than nothing. She looked at him. He was not the sort of person who said things like that usually. He was precise and skeptical, and allergic to optimism that was not supported by data. "When did you start saying things like that?" she asked. He shrugged. "About the time I understood what happens if we don't." She turned back to the machine. She picked up a stylus and a tablet and started writing. The containment geometry, the 3 ideas. She would work through all 3 simultaneously, parallel tracks, and see which one moved fastest. "Get everyone in here at 7 tomorrow," she said. "We're starting over." Priya's signal team made a discovery in month 22 that was so strange it took them a week to trust it. They had been working on a particular layer of the transmission, one that did not fit the pattern of the rest. The operational communications had a clear structure: destination, origin, timestamp, content. This layer had destinations and timestamps, but the origin tag was different, smaller, encoded differently. It took them 3 weeks of careful work to realize that the different encoding was not a variation in the sender's format. It was a different sender entirely. Something inside the fleet was sending messages that the fleet command was not supposed to see. Priya stared at this conclusion for a long time before she said it out loud to her team. "You're saying there's a dissident," said Dr. Okonkwo, the linguist on her team, "inside their fleet." "I'm saying there's a source inside the fleet sending separate transmissions," Priya said carefully. "I don't know what their motivation is. Can we decode the separate transmissions? We've been trying. They're encoded differently from the operational traffic. It's going to take time." Okonkwo leaned back in his chair. "Or," he said slowly, "we could answer one." The room went very quiet. "We don't know what we'd be answering," said Priya. "No. But they clearly know we can receive." Priya sat with this. The idea was enormous. It was also terrifying. Making contact with a possible dissident inside an approaching alien fleet was so far outside any planning document she had ever read that she could not locate it on any map of what they were supposed to be doing. But the signal team was supposed to understand how the enemy communicated, and she had spent 2 years learning their logic. She flagged the discovery up the chain. She included a recommendation. The recommendation was to attempt a response. It took 11 days to get a decision back. The decision was yes. The response took 3 weeks to construct. They could not simply transmit in their own language. They had to use the structural logic of the incoming transmission, the same encoding patterns, the same format, the same rhythm, so that the intended recipient would recognize it, and the fleet's automated systems would not flag it as something new. It was the hardest translation challenge Priya had ever attempted. Not translating words, translating intent, carefully enough to be understood by something that thought in patterns she had been studying for 2 years. The message they sent was short. In the structural language of the transmission, it said roughly, "We hear you. We are here. We are not what the report says." That was all. No threats, no pleas, no detailed arguments. She did not know enough about what she was talking to. Did not know whether the dissident, if that was the right word, if there was a right word, was reaching out because of doubt, or sympathy, or self-interest, or something that had no human equivalent. She did not know. What she knew was that if there was something inside that fleet that was not entirely committed to the plan, then "we are not what the report says" was the truest and most important thing she could say. They sent the response, and then they waited. The wait was 26 days. Then the separate signal layer lit up, different pattern. New encoding, more complex. Okonkwo looked at it and said, "It's longer than what we sent." "A lot longer," Priya said. They started working. It took 9 days. When the translation came out the other side, Priya read it 3 times. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she went and found a window and looked out at the sky. Okonkwo appeared at her elbow. "What does it say?" She handed him the translation. He read it. His face went through several things. "It says they have a faction," he said slowly, "inside the fleet, who disagree with the extraction." "Yes. How large a faction?" "It says significant, but not a majority." "What do they want?" Priya was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sky was doing what skies do. Clouds moving, light changing, birds. "They want to know," she said, "if we are worth the argument." Okonkwo was very still. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "I haven't answered yet," she said. She turned from the window. She went back to her desk. She pulled up a blank document and sat with it for a long time, looking at the empty page and the blinking cursor, thinking about everything that had been built in 2 years, everything that was being built, the ships and the drives and the soldiers and the 17 plans and the physicists and the shipyard workers, and all of the ordinary people who had gotten up and gone to work, because the work was what was available. She thought about what it meant to be worth the argument. Then she started writing. The 3rd year was when things started to look real. Before that, everything had been a promise. Ships on drawing boards, engines in testing chambers, soldiers running simulations, plans that lived on whiteboards and in documents. The world had been working at a scale that was almost impossible to see in any single place. You could visit a shipyard and see the ships. You could visit a research lab and see the machines. But you could not see the whole thing at once, could not stand somewhere and look at all of it together. And so it had a quality almost like a dream, massive and urgent and not entirely solid. In the 3rd year it became solid. The ships came out of the yards in real numbers. Not just the first few test models, but actual squadrons, actual fleets. Ugly ships, still. Nobody had fixed the ugly. But they were real, and they moved. And when Reyes stood on the observation platform above the Pacific Yard and watched a formation of 17 vessels execute a tight turn drill in low orbit, something settled in her chest that had been unsettled for 2 years. Not confidence, not exactly. Something more careful than confidence, more honest. We are not nothing, she thought. Whatever else is true, we are not nothing. Yuki's drive worked. The second prototype delivered 91% of the theoretical output, which was close enough. The scaling model had taken 4 months and 11 people, and an argument with a physicist in Brazil that had run for 6 weeks across email and video calls, and had, at one point, involved someone throwing a coffee cup at a screen. The argument had been brutal and loud and productive. The physicist in Brazil, a woman named Dr. Ferreira, had eventually come to Geneva and sat in the lab for 3 weeks, and driven everyone, including Yuki, slightly insane, and also solved the central problem in the scaling model in an afternoon, once she had seen the actual hardware. That was how it kept going. The 3rd year. People. Finding each other, arguing, solving, moving. The drive, once it worked in the lab, went into a ship hull in 7 months. The Meridian was not a beautiful ship. It was a medium-range destroyer, one of the 3rd generation that had come out of the Pacific Yards, and it had been pulled off the line specifically for the drive installation. The engineers who modified it had worked in 3 rotating shifts for 5 months, without taking more than 3 consecutive days off, and they had names for each other that were more affectionate than their normal names, the kind of names people develop when they have worked so close together for so long that their work becomes a shared identity. The Meridian made its first test run in month 31 of the 4-year window. It was supposed to run a standard transit from Earth orbit to Mars and back. At conventional drive speeds, that was a journey of roughly 6 to 8 months each way. At the speeds Yuki's drive was theoretically capable of, it should take days. Yuki was not on the Meridian. She watched from a monitoring station. She stood very still the whole time, the way people stand when they are trying not to disturb the air around a delicate thing. The Meridian accelerated. The monitors showed the field asymmetry building, a shimmer in the readings, a wobble in the numbers that looked wrong in exactly the right way, the way Yuki had learned to recognize as the signature of something that should not work but did. The Meridian crossed the distance to Mars in 4 days. It came back in 3, because on the return leg the crew felt comfortable enough to push the drive a little harder. Yuki sat down when they confirmed the return. She had been standing for 7 hours. She sat down and put her face in her hands and stayed like that for a while, not crying, just stopping, letting herself stop for the first time in months. Imai put a hand on her shoulder. He did not say anything. She did not need him to. The translation from the dissident inside the fleet had taken 3 months to fully decode, because it was far more complex than the initial messages. What it contained was not just words, it was data, structured, dense, carefully packaged, information about the fleet that no amount of external signal analysis could have provided, ship counts, weapon systems, formation tactics, the first wave's operational plan in significant detail, and a warning. The first wave commander, the data made clear, was what translated roughly as a certainty specialist, a commander who had done dozens of extractions and had never encountered meaningful resistance, someone who had built a career on the assumption that the universe was a predictable place. That kind of commander, the dissident wrote, and here Priya noticed a tone in the translation that felt almost careful, almost the way you write about someone you know personally, does not adapt well to the unexpected. The model that has always worked will be used until it stops working. And when it stops working, there will be hesitation, because this commander has never needed to develop a second model. This was not a guarantee of anything. The first wave was still enormous. The numbers were sobering. Even with the new drives, even with everything that had been built, the raw math of what was coming was not comfortable. But the dissident was saying, hit them with something they have not seen. Hit them hard and fast and with things that do not fit their model. Make the certainty specialist uncertain. Priya forwarded the full translation to Reyes. Reyes read it and sent back a one-line reply. Brief me Thursday. Bring your linguist. The Thursday briefing went 4 hours. Reyes asked questions that made Priya realize the colonel had already been thinking along the same lines. The conversation was less about convincing Reyes of anything and more about combining what Priya knew with what Reyes was already planning. At the end of the 4 hours, Reyes said, I want you to keep the channel open. Whatever they send, I want it immediately. Yes, ma'am. And I want you to ask them one more thing. What's that? Reyes said. Ask them if their faction can act. During the engagement, if things start going a certain way, can they do something? Priya thought about this. That's a significant ask. Yes. We're asking them to risk, whatever the consequences are for them. Yes, Reyes said again. We are. Priya was quiet for a moment. She thought about the dissident, whoever or whatever they were, sending separate transmissions inside an alien fleet that had approved a plan. The particular kind of courage that required, or the particular kind of conscience, or calculation, or whatever the right word was for the thing that made someone decide to do the risky thing instead of the easy thing. She thought, I understand that person. Whatever they look like, whatever they are, I'll ask, she said. Month 37, 14 months to the estimated arrival. Reyes stood in front of her assembled commanders and looked at the faces she had been building for 3 years. 23 men and women from 16 countries, representing every branch of the combined defense force. She had chosen them over time, one by one, based not on rank or history, but on the specific qualities she had been watching for in all the simulations. The ones who froze for half a second. Not the ones who did not freeze. Nobody did not freeze. The ones who froze for half a second were the ones who came back online faster and hit harder, because they had processed enough to act instead of reacting blind. We have 14 months, she said. We have more ships than anyone thought we could build. We have a drive technology that is going to come as a genuine surprise to a fleet that thought it knew everything. We have 17 plans and teams that have practiced all 17 until they can run them in their sleep. She paused. We also have numbers that are not in our favor. I want to be honest about that because I do not believe in protecting grown adults from mathematics. Nobody in the room blinked. What we have, she continued, is something harder to quantify. We have the advantage of being underestimated. They filed a report. The report rated us as uncomplicated. Uncomplicated means they are coming with a standard approach. They are not bringing something tailored for us. They are bringing what always works. She looked around the room. Our job is to make sure what always works doesn't. Our job is to be the experience they have never had. Fast where they expect slow. Complex where they expect simple. Adaptive where they expect compliance. A commander from South Korea, General Park, spoke without raising her hand, the way she always did. Ma'am, what about the faction? Reyes said. It exists. We have confirmation. We do not count on it. If it acts, it's a multiplier. If it doesn't, our plans do not require it. We do not build a strategy on someone else's courage. Park nodded. Any other questions? Silence. Good, Reyes said. Because we don't have time for questions. We have time for work. Get back to it. The last thing Priya sent to the dissident, in month 38, was the longest message the signal team had ever constructed. It was not military information. It was not strategic data. Reyes had not asked her to send that. What Reyes had asked her to send was the answer to the question, are you worth the argument? Priya had spent a month writing it. She had asked for help from people she would not normally have thought to ask. A poet in Lagos, a historian in Seoul, a school teacher in rural Canada, who had been chosen because she had sent a letter to the UAD contact office that contained, in Priya's opinion, the clearest explanation anyone had written of what it felt like to be a human being alive in this moment. The message described things, not achievements, not military capacity, not the ships or the drives or the plans, things. The meal that still needed to be made. The argument over a theory that turned out to be right. The 16-year-old who taught himself orbital mechanics because the problem was there, and he wanted to solve it. The construction worker who went back to the job on a broken bone. The 200 years of music and argument and love and war that the report had rated as 6 paragraphs and then moved on from. It described what it felt like to know something was coming, and to build anyway. It described what it felt like to be told you were in the way, and to decide that the person telling you that was wrong about what you were. At the end, Priya wrote, and she had argued with herself about this last part for 3 days, and ultimately decided it was the truest thing, and therefore the right thing. We do not ask you to fight for us. We ask only that you understand what you are choosing between. We are here. We are not what the report says. Whatever you decide, we will still be here, and we will make them remember they were here too. She sent it. She did not know if it would arrive in time. She did not know if the dissident still had the capacity to act, or the will, or the numbers. She did not know enough about what was happening inside that fleet to make any kind of calculation. What she knew was that the message was true, and truth, she had decided, was what you sent when you had sent everything else. The clock said 12 months and some days. The work continued. Yuki was in the drive calibration lab when Torres found her. At 11 at night, 3 days before the Meridian was set to begin full weapons integration testing. He handed her a piece of paper, old-fashioned paper, which was the kind of thing that happened when the information was the sort that did not belong on a screen. She read it. Then she read it again. The paper was a report from the long-range sensors. The fleet's leading elements, scouts, the signal team believed, had been detected at the edge of the solar system. Not the main wave, not yet, the scouts, ahead of schedule, by approximately 7 weeks. She handed the paper back to Torres. "Does Reyes know?" she asked. "She's being briefed right now," he said. "The Meridian testing. Accelerated. Starting tomorrow morning." Yuki looked at the drive calibration equipment around her. At the years of work that had led here. At the machine that did what it was told now, reliably, every time, because they had refused to stop working on it until it did. 7 weeks early, she said. "Yes, ma'am." She thought about the certainty specialist, the commander who had done this dozens of times and expected a quiet approach and a compliant target. She thought, "You came early because you're not worried." She thought, "Good. Tell my team," she said. "We're in early." They came in slow. That was the first thing Reyes noticed from the command deck of the Concordia, the flagship of the combined human fleet, sitting in a defensive position behind Luna's shadow. The alien first wave came in slow and organized, the way you move through a place you already own, the way you walk through a room you have already assessed and found empty. That confirmed what the dissident had told them. Certainty specialist, moving like a person who has never once been wrong. Torres, beside her, said quietly, 64 capital ships in the first formation, 112 support vessels, just like the data said. Weapons, active. Not targeting yet, because they're not expecting to need to target, Reyes said. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at the formation on the tactical display. Slow, organized. The geometry of a civilization that had done this so many times the choreography was automatic. She thought about her 17 plans. Then she thought about what she actually knew. Here, now, with the fleet in front of her, and the information from 3 years of preparation, and 1 contact inside the enemy's own ships. She chose Plan 9. "All wings," she said. "This is Reyes. Execute Horizon 9. The human fleet came out of the shadow of the moon. They did not announce themselves. They did not broadcast warnings or demands. Reyes had argued this point for 2 days with the UN liaison and won. You do not give a certainty specialist time to become certain again. You do not give them space to reload the model. You hit before the model can run. The Meridian was at the leading edge. Because the Meridian had the drive, it moved. The alien formation, which had been tracking the area around Earth's moon as a standard defensive possibility, had allocated sensor resources accordingly. Standard, reasonable. The correct thing to do against a civilization that had been rated as uncomplicated. The Meridian crossed the calculated intercept distance in less than 40% of the time the alien sensors had modeled as minimum possible. Reyes watched the alien formation's response time on the tactical display. The pause before they began to adjust. Half a second, then 5 more. Then the formation started to turn, slowly, which was the wrong move. The move of something that had turned in response to threats before, and had a muscle memory of how that worked, and was trying to use that muscle memory now, even though this threat was not the threat the muscle memory was for. "They're turning to engage," Torres said. "Wrong direction," Reyes said. "Yes, ma'am. They think we're leading with the meridian." They were not leading with the meridian. The meridian was the distraction. While the alien formation's attention tracked the impossibly fast destroyer cutting across their flank, the rest of the human fleet executed the second half of Horizon 9, coming in from above the ecliptic plane in a spread formation that the alien sensors had been looking at for 30 seconds and had apparently decided was defensive positioning. It was not defensive positioning. The first full weapons exchange of the Battle of Sol happened 4 minutes after the human fleet came out of Luna's shadow. Priya was not on a ship. She was at the signal station in New Mexico, because that was where she could do the most useful thing, and the most useful thing right now was to listen. The Dissidents channel had gone silent 10 days ago, silent in a deliberate way, the kind of silence that Okonkwo said felt like someone being careful, not someone being gone. She listened. Around her, the signal team sat at their stations. Nobody spoke much. The battle was happening in real time and nobody in this room could affect it, which was a particular kind of helplessness that Priya had decided to simply accept, because the alternative was to let it paralyze her. The sensor data that filtered through to civilian monitoring stations told a fragmented story. Ship positions, energy readings, the mathematical ghost of a battle happening 90,000 kilometers away. At 17 minutes into the engagement, the Dissidents channel opened. Priya went cold, then warm. It was long, far longer than anything they had sent before. Okonkwo was on it immediately, and 2 other linguists, all of them working fast, and the translation came out in pieces because the full decoding would take hours, and they did not have hours. The first piece, faction moving. Now, the second piece, 2 minutes later, 3 capital ships. Targeting your coordinates provided. Priya's hands were flat on the desk in front of her. She did not move them. She read the translation and thought, they did it. Whatever the cost was to them, they did it. She read the third piece, which came last, and was the hardest to decode, and when it came through she read it twice. The third piece said, "You were right, the report was wrong. We are sorry it took us so long to say it." She sat with that for a while. Then she flagged all 3 pieces and sent them to the Concordia. Reyes got the transmission at minute 23 of the engagement. She read it on a tablet that Torres handed her without a word, while simultaneously monitoring the tactical display where 3 alien capital ships had just broken from the main formation in a direction that did not make tactical sense if you were trying to support the first wave. It made complete sense if you were trying to oppose it. The certainty specialist's response to his own ships turning against him added another 6 seconds to the pause time. 6 seconds is forever in a battle. "Wing 3, Reyes said. "You have a gap opening at bearing 274. Take it." Wing 3 took it. The Battle of Sol lasted 41 minutes. That felt impossibly short later, when people tried to explain it, because 41 minutes against a fleet of that size should not have been possible. But possible was a word that kept meaning something different now than it used to mean. Possible was a word that kept getting revised. The alien first wave had been built for a world where the target did not fight back intelligently. It had not trained for a coordinated multi-vector assault from a fleet using drive technology that should not have existed. It had not modeled for ships that moved the wrong amount in the wrong direction at the wrong time. It had absolutely not planned for 3 of its own capital ships to flip allegiance mid-battle. Not fighting for humanity exactly, but not fighting against humanity either. Just stopping, pulling back, sending a transmission to the first wave commander that Priya's team decoded 3 hours later. The transmission said, more or less, "This is not what the report said. Stop and assess." The first wave commander, the certainty specialist, stopped. It was not a full stop. It was a retreat, a disciplined withdrawal back beyond the outer solar system, the kind of movement that said, "We are not defeated. We are recalculating," which was honest. They were not defeated. They were surprised, and they were recalculating, and there was a second wave, and a third wave, and this was not over. But they stopped. They stopped. And the sun rose over Earth the next morning the same way it always had, and the people who had worked in the shipyards and the labs and the signal stations and the command rooms did not celebrate exactly, not with the loose, relieved joy of an ending. They celebrated the way people celebrate when a hard thing has not killed them yet. Careful, awake, eyes open. Priya walked outside the morning after. The desert was the same desert. The hawks were hunting the same way they had always hunted. The sky was the particular color of early morning in New Mexico that she had seen 10,000 times in 11 years. She had her journal with her. She sat on the concrete steps outside the building and opened it to a blank page. She sat for a while without writing. She thought about the dissident, somewhere out there in a fleet that had pulled back to regroup, a faction that had stopped a certainty specialist for 6 seconds when 6 seconds mattered. She did not know what had happened to them after. She did not know what the cost had been or would be. She had sent a transmission asking. She did not know if it would be answered. She thought about the things she had written in the message. We will make them remember they were here too. She thought, we did not win. We survived the first round of something that has second and third rounds, and we did it with everything we had. And now we have to think about what we do with what we have left. She thought about Reyes, who she had spoken to briefly this morning on the phone. Reyes, who sounded like a person who had slept 3 hours and intended to get back to work immediately. Reyes, who said, without any drama, the second wave is still out there. We have some time. Not enough, but some. She thought about Yuki, who had sent a message that said only, the drive held, working on improvements, nothing else. Because Yuki did not say things she did not need to say. She thought about Torres, and Okonkwo, and Dr. Ferreira, who had thrown a coffee cup at a screen, and the 16-year-old who was probably not 16 anymore, and the construction worker with the broken bone, and the old woman in Nigeria who had gone inside to make the meal. She thought about what it had cost, and what it still would cost, and what it meant that they were still here to pay it. She wrote, morning after, the desert is the same, the hawks are the same. We did not win. We refused to lose. There is a difference, and it matters. They came expecting nothing and found us. I want to say they found us ready, but that is not exactly true. They found us preparing. They found us in the middle of becoming the thing we needed to be, and the middle was enough, just barely, just this time. I keep thinking about the dissident, about what it costs to tell the truth to people who have the power to punish you for it. About 3 capital ships pulling away from a formation mid-battle because something that thought it knew everything met something it had not accounted for, and some part of that fleet looked at us and decided the report was wrong. We were worth the argument. I don't know what comes next. Nobody does. The second wave is out there, and the math is still not comfortable, and there is so much more work to do, and we are tired in a way that does not have a word for it. But we are here. We are here, and they know it now. They wrote a report on us. 6 paragraphs, uncomplicated. I would like to read the new report. I think it will be longer. Reyes held her final debrief at 1400 hours the day after the battle. 41 minutes of engagement, 11 human ships destroyed, 43 damaged, human casualties, 412. She read the number and let it sit in the room the way it deserved to sit. Nobody looked away. Then she said, enemy capital ships destroyed or disabled, 22. Support vessels, 48. Enemy withdrawal, confirmed. Second wave, estimated arrival 8 to 12 months, depending on their response to what happened here. She set the papers down. We gave them something they didn't have a plan for, she said. That's done. They'll have a plan next time. I want us to have something new, that they still don't have a plan for. We have 8 months to build it. We have a contact inside that fleet who told us something and took a real risk to tell us. I want to know what we can tell them in return. A commander from India, Admiral Sharma, said, what do you think they want? The faction? Reyes thought about this. She thought about Priya's message, about being worth the argument. I think they want what everyone wants when they take a risk, she said. They want to know the risk was worth it. They want to know we're still here. She looked around the room. So let's make sure we are. Somewhere in the outer solar system, at a distance that registered on human sensors as a cluster of quiet readings that could have been debris, 3 alien capital ships held position. Inside one of them, a being who had no human name and looked nothing like a human and had made a choice that was going to take a long time to live with, sat and listened to a transmission that had just arrived. It was from the 3rd planet, the one the report had called Sol 3. The one the report had rated as uncomplicated. The transmission was short. It said, we're still here. Thank you. We know what you risked. We will not forget it. There is a second wave coming. If you can hear this, tell us what you know. We will still be here when you answer. The being sat with the transmission for a long time. Outside, the stars were the same stars they had always been. The 3rd planet was a small, bright point of light against the dark, unremarkable from this distance, quiet-looking. The kind of thing you would pass without looking twice. The being had read the report, had read it carefully, the way you read something before you decide whether you believe it. The report had been wrong. The being began to compose a reply. Priya got back to work. There was always more signal to read. There was always another layer to decode, another piece of information hiding inside the steady transmission that had not stopped since the night she had watched the green lines spike and reached over and hit every record button she could find. The signal was still coming. Of course it was. Different now, altered in ways the team was cataloging, changed by whatever had happened inside the fleet since the battle, carrying new information about new intentions. She listened. The desert was hot and bright outside the window. The coffee was cold the way it was always cold. The monitors glowed green. She had started this by noticing something. She was going to keep noticing things until there was nothing left to notice, or there was no one left to notice it. And she was not planning on the second option. The cursor blinked on her screen. She started working. Outside, a hawk circled in the clear and ordinary sky, patient, watching, already knowing what it was going to do.